We have some questions from the audience. Dave, I believe this would be geared primarily to you. How will the end of agency fees affect locals like 775?
So we should, one of my lawyers is in the room who will probably send me glares if I say something I'm not supposed to here. But listen, I think, the Australian trade union movement had to struggle with this in the 90s when they lost worksite access, agency fee, dues deduction, all on the same day under the Howard government. And they suffered, I would say, a debilitating crisis in the short term, and arguably perhaps emerged stronger in the long term, as they had to, in many ways, re-earn the love and loyalty of members that, in some ways leadership had taken for granted after, sort of a 100-year tradition of labor functioning so much of the part of the government that all you had to do was put on a union name badge and you could walk into any work site and inspect the safety conditions and the like. So, I think that, the record so far is mixed. When you look at what's happened, you can look at Wisconsin, look at Michigan, look at home care in Ohio, and in many cases, there's a pretty scary and depressing results. You also look, I think, at what both AFSCME and SEIU have done, in light of Harris v. Quinn. Membership levels are incredibly high and actually have gone up since the decision, not down. So, I think that most people in the world, let's be, agency fee is not the norm in most of the globe, right? It's not. And, most labor movements figure out how they actually speak for all of the workers while collecting dues from a minority of the workers. And that's not our model. It's not the model we was before 1950 or so. It was, even Louis Brandeis, who was, very pro-labor, actually questioned whether it was the right political decision for unions to pursue the agency shop. Listen, I'd say we would keep it if we could. We have this particular Supreme Court, which gave us Bush v. Gore and Citizens United to thank for what happened in Harris, what will quite possibly happen in Friedrich. And, I think we have to be willing to stand up and say no court is going to stop workers from building power. And if there's anything that I'd say, it reminds us that now is a time for risk and experimentation and trying to build new models. It's that whether we like it or not, some of the tools associated with those old models are going away. How'd I do? All right.
Here's another question. In a lot of industries, white union leaders and white union members are trying to preserve what they've gained and view unorganized Black and Latino workers as their enemies. How to overcome this? Anyone?
Well, the Black and Latino members can vote out if the union has any shred of democracy. I have seen this in the hotel workers in Los Angeles. I've seen it in lots of other unions. The answer is if you're discriminated against in your union, you get angry, you organize opposition, and you go from there. And if you have a legal case, you file a legal case.
Are there any examples of successful minority union models?
Well, the most exciting one that I assume we'll hear more about later today is UAW in Chattanooga, which essentially is a minority union that is bargaining with management and is a path, I believe, probably shortly to majority status. But I think it's one of the exciting innovations that we're seeing within the traditional trade union movement, and that will, it's not without its perils, but I believe it'll probably be discussed more this afternoon as well.
Okay, and the final question I have is about militancy and a need for militants, and how can and should we focus our energies on finding and creating more militants? How central is militancy to your organization's thinking, and how do new forms of organizing foster more militancy?
I'll take that. I think others may have something to say about it. I guess the way I'd answer that may also relate to the last question as well. I mean, ultimately, we spend a lot of time thinking about policy, whether that's embedded in an employment contract or in a law or in regulations. And those of us on the left, I mean, really do like to think about what should the law be, or what should the contract say, or what should, what's right. And we have to accept, I think, that policy is merely frozen power. And when your power starts to melt, the policy, whether it's contractual, legal, political, that when you no longer have that level of power, then the policies that you depend on go away, and you can't pass the new ones that you like. Power, in turn, only really comes from disruption. And then what happens is that you disrupt the status quo. At some point, it accommodates. New seats are somehow found to fit at the table. That everyone swore there were no new seats available, and somehow some new seats show up, and then you get a chance to be one of the parties to some sort of, whether it's political, contractual, whatever, bargain. And that is as true of an effective contract fight as it was about how we got the labor law we have to begin with. So the question for the 21st century, it seems, is what is the new disruptive force that can replace the forgotten art of the industrial strike in an economy where that is no longer particularly powerful? And I don't think we know what that is, but that has to be our North Star in our quest to find the new thing. And in Seattle, it was militancy by fast food workers who closed down a bunch of restaurants, captured the hearts and minds of a city, right, in this very tight timeline. This wasn't even anyone's master plan. We just kind of did it. Convinced people who had never thought about a $15 minimum wage that it was totally normal to be for a $15 minimum wage. No one even polled on the question until after the campaign was done, when we discovered that, in fact, 75% of the public supported it. But I think that came from disruptive activity on the part of workers.
And I agree, but I think that also we need to make sure that we need militant action, we need that inspiration, but leaders need to have followers, and you can't have a vanguard that's so far out in front that isn't backed up by both organization and an ever-widening base of support. So, for example, during Occupy Wall Street, Working America, which goes out and talks to, in these working class neighborhoods, talks to folk on their doorsteps every single night, we went out to talk to them about Occupy Wall Street. And while the first reaction from most people is, I don't even know where I'm not going to go sleep in a park. That was not where any of our members were, their heads were at. But it required engaging in a discussion about, what do we mean by income inequality? Because it's still actually a pretty abstract phrase for most of our members, so that you can't take a mass base for granted. You have to organize a mass base, and you can't do it just one by one, but you can't do it just by inspiration.
All right, one last question for you, Karen. If class consciousness is one of the measures of the progress we seek, what are the observable metrics for it, and what is your experience in Working America with increasing it?
Well, I'll tell you, it's a fair question, really, and we pay a lot of attention not just to what we say when we're in neighborhoods, but what we hear. I'm embarrassed almost to say we call this the information accordion. That we're putting information out, we're getting information back. We've had 8 million conversations in these working class neighborhoods over the last 10 years, and so we got a lot of data. But one of the things that we've noticed is that over that decade, fewer and fewer people have any direct experience or even notion with the idea of collective power. That as union density has declined, this connection to the idea about strength in numbers, which is what we talk about at every single door, is evanescent. It's more and more distant. And that is a foundational problem. We have to find the ways that we reintroduce the saliency of the notion of collective power. And again, I think that is some combination of brick by brick and inspiration that we need to be going to find. We have to go interrupt the people who are not looking for us, interrupt their normal paths of conclusions about how their lives work, and move them in a different direction. So that's one measure that we experience. Another measure is the 2014 elections. We just talked about how people could, vote for minimum wage and Bruce Rauner, or vote to defeat the anti-worker a ballot initiative in Anchorage, Alaska, while they were voting against Mark Begich, who was supporting them. Progressive economic populism does not necessarily translate anymore. There's a rupture between that and progressive politics. So I'd say we're kind of like rock bottom right now when it comes to class consciousness. It's changed because of the roiling that's going on around, whether it's fast food or Fight for 15 and our Walmart. Those things are extremely powerful, and they help to shift, but it's got to be much more ideological than just that, and we have to take that on. And in Working America, we are taking it on, and we're actually going to we're going to measure it. We're going to find the measurements over the next several years to really challenge ourselves about whether we're doing it right.
Great. And closing thought from Harold.
My friend Guy Molyneux, who is leading labor pollster at the Peter Hart firm, put out a memo to Democratic candidates sometime before the 2014 election saying, I know you all, ritually invoke the middle class in your comments, but our polling suggests that the number of Americans identifying themselves as middle class in recent years has fallen from 40% to 25%. So that is a shift in a kind of class consciousness. People are aware that they're getting screwed and that their kids are not going to have as good a life as they. It does not follow from that, as Karen says, that they have any notion of the possibilities of collective action, that they think of that they really target the right targets. A lot of people still blame minorities and others for their lot. But that has, but there is certainly, as obvious as the sun rising in the east, an awareness that most people's economic prospects are either stuck or declining, and it's up to us to figure out, as everyone here is trying to do, how best to deal with that and turn the situation of unconsciousness about the possibilities of collective action, how to turn that around.
Thank you, everyone.